2 words. That's all it took. Not a press conference. Not an injury. Not a trade. Just 2 quiet words reportedly spoken inside a closed Team USA meeting. I'm done. And suddenly, the most electrifying player in women's basketball wasn't trending for a Logo 3 or a record-breaking performance. She was trending because something inside Team USA had cracked. Caitlin Clark didn't storm out in front of cameras. She didn't post a cryptic tweet. There was no dramatic announcement. Just tension, silence, and then whispers that spread faster than any highlight she's ever hit from 35 feet. At first, it sounded exaggerated. Social media drama. Internet speculation doing what it does best. But then more details started surfacing. Training camp friction. Questions about offensive schemes. A reportedly heated exchange with head coach Carol Lawson. And the part that made fans pause. The coaching structure looked eerily similar to the one Clark had just spent months navigating in Indiana. This wasn't random. This wasn't emotional instability. This felt like a breaking point. And here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. This situation didn't begin in that meeting room. It didn't even begin in 2025. It started the moment USA Basketball decided Caitlin Clark wasn't ready. Because ever since that decision, a pattern has been quietly building. A pattern of hesitation, of hierarchy, of a system that doesn't quite know what to do with a player who doesn't fit neatly inside it. What happened inside that gym wasn't just a disagreement about plays. It was a collision between a generational talent and a structure built long before she arrived. And to understand why those 2 words carried so much weight, we have to rewind. Go back to the 2024 Olympic roster announcement. The world expected one name, Caitlin Clark. She had just shattered college scoring records. She had become the face of women's basketball almost overnight. Arenas were selling out before she even declared for the draft. Television ratings were climbing at numbers the sport hadn't seen in decades. And then her name wasn't there. The explanation sounded reasonable at first. The roster was finalized before her WNBA season. She needs professional experience. She hasn't proven herself at this level yet. Fair enough. That's what people said. Development takes time. International basketball is different. Veteran chemistry matters. So Clark didn't complain. She didn't subtweet. She didn't throw shade. She went to work. And what happened next is where the pattern begins to feel uncomfortable. Her rookie season wasn't solid. It wasn't promising. It was historic. She led the league in assists. Finished near the top in scoring. Transformed Indiana from a struggling franchise into a legitimate playoff contender. Attendance surged. Road arenas filled. Jersey sales exploded. The Fever weren't just competitive, they were must-watch television. And suddenly, the same voices that said she hasn't proven herself were shifting the goalposts. Now it became about fit. Now it became about chemistry. Now it became about hierarchy. When the 2025 Team USA roster dropped, Clark's name was finally there. But the energy felt muted. No feature graphic spotlighting her. No headlines centered around the league's most marketable player. No celebratory tone acknowledging that she had done exactly what was asked. It was almost procedural. Just another name on a list. And fans noticed. Within hours, social media lit up with one recurring theme. Why does it feel like they're reluctant? That question spread because it tapped into something deeper than marketing optics. It felt like resistance. Not open hostility. Not sabotage. Just a subtle unwillingness to fully embrace what she represents. And that's where the tension really started building. Because this isn't just about talent. It's about timing. Caitlin Clark didn't just enter the WNBA. She changed its economic gravity. Ratings jumped. Debate shows started leading with women's basketball segments. Ticket resale prices spiked. National broadcasts expanded. And when a player shifts the financial ecosystem of a sport that quickly, institutions don't always respond smoothly. They adjust cautiously. They protect established structures. They lean on veterans. They prioritize familiarity. USA Basketball has always rewarded loyalty and experience. That system built gold medal dynasties. It worked for decades. But Clark doesn't fit into that timeline. She accelerated it. And that acceleration creates friction. Because now the governing body isn't just evaluating a player. It's managing a transition of power. Look at the guard rotation. Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, proven champions. Established relationships with USA staff. Olympic gold medalists. By traditional standards, they get first priority. But Clark's statistical impact in her rookie season would have ranked top 5 in multiple previous WNBA seasons. Not just among rookies. Among everyone. Performance says she should start. Hierarchy says she should wait. And when those two things clash, institutions usually side with hierarchy. That's not conspiracy. That's human nature. And here's where the emotional undercurrent starts to build. Every time Clark clears the bar moves. First it was prove it professionally. She did. Then it became earn your place within the system. But what happens when the system doesn't evolve with the player? What happens when the style that makes her special, the deep range, the improvisation, the pick-and-roll chaos, the fast reads, gets filtered through conservative structure? Because that's what critics quietly began pointing out during her rookie season. There were moments in Indiana where her fourth-quarter usage dipped. Moments when she deferred inside sets that slowed the pace. Moments in playoff games where she was hot and the ball moved elsewhere. Not because she isn't capable. Not because coaches are incompetent. But because systems sometimes prioritize balance over brilliance. Now bring that context into Team USA. A national team loaded with offensive weapons. And instead of signaling, let them run, the early whispers suggested structure. Controlled pace. Defined roles. For most players, that's fine. For Caitlin Clark, it feels like a leash. And that's the word fans keep circling back to, not literally, but emotionally. Is she being unleashed? Or managed? Because the energy surrounding her inclusion didn't feel like empowerment. It felt cautious, measured, almost hesitant. And when you stack that on top of being left off the Olympic roster the year before, it stops feeling isolated. It starts looking like a pattern of delayed validation, a pattern of institutional hesitation, a pattern that builds pressure inside a player who has done everything asked of her, and more. So when reports surfaced that she questioned the offensive structure during training camp, it didn't feel random. It felt inevitable. But that meeting, the one that allegedly shifted everything, wasn't just about plays. It was about voice. And what happened next inside that gym would turn quiet frustration into national debate. The roster announcement caused noise. But the coaching announcement changed the temperature. 3 days after the player list dropped, USA Basketball revealed who would be running the show. Carol Lawson. On paper, that makes sense. Former WNBA player. Respected coach. Duke head coach. Experienced voice. But this isn't about credentials. It's about philosophy. Because if you watched Duke during the 2024-25 season, you saw something very specific. Structured half-court sets. Slower tempo. Emphasis on spacing discipline. Controlled ball movement. A system designed to minimize chaos. And chaos is where Caitlin Clark lives. Clark isn't just a scorer. She's a disruptor. Her game bends defensive geometry. She forces traps 35 feet from the rim. She turns broken plays into daggers. She reads pick-and-roll coverages like a quarterback reading blitz packages. Her brilliance doesn't thrive inside rigidity. It thrives in flow. Now imagine stepping from a WNBA season where your offensive system already felt tight, straight into a national team camp that looks almost identical on the whiteboard. That's where the second layer of tension begins. Because Carol Lawson wasn't the only name that stood out. Stephanie White was there too. And that's where things get complicated. Let's be clear, Stephanie White is not some villain in this story. She's accomplished. She's respected. She's proven she can win. But proximity matters. White had just spent months coaching Clark in Indiana. Film sessions, rotations, playoff adjustments, usage decisions. Every possession filtered through her philosophy. And now she's on the Team USA staff. Again, that makes 4 USA-related appearances in less than a year connected directly to Clark's orbit. Training camp, Indiana hire, national camp assistant role, World Cup qualifying staff. For most players, national team duty is a reset. A new voice, a different evaluation lens, a fresh start. Clark didn't get that. She walked from one structured environment straight into another featuring the same decision-makers. That's not inherently wrong, but it eliminates psychological oxygen. Elite athletes at Clark's level don't just need coaching. They need evolution. They need friction from new perspectives. They need someone who hasn't already formed an opinion about how they should operate late in games. Because once a coach sees you in certain patterns, deferring here, forcing shots there, thriving in specific sets, that image sticks. And fair or not, it shapes future decisions. Now think about this from Clark's side. She just averaged nearly 20 points and over 8 assists as a rookie. Historic numbers. Yet analysts repeatedly pointed out that in tight fourth quarters, her usage dipped in some games. The offense slowed. Veteran-heavy initiations took priority. Controlled execution over explosive improvisation. That's not a knock on White. That's system preference. But when a player feels like her best weapon isn't always the primary option, that frustration doesn't vanish overnight. It lingers. So when she walks into Team USA camp and sees similar principles being installed, that feeling resurfaces. And here's the subtle psychological shift most fans miss. It's not about ego. It's about agency. Clark doesn't need every shot. She needs trust. Trust that when the game tilts, the system will tilt with her. Trust that her style isn't something to manage, but something to amplify. When that trust feels uncertain, tension builds quietly. Now layer in the veteran dynamic. Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, established USA staples, gold medal history, long-standing relationships with USA basketball leadership. Those connections matter in international competition, but they also create invisible pecking orders, even unintentionally. When rotations are discussed, when minutes are mapped out, when roles are assigned, familiarity often wins the tiebreaker. And Clark knows that. Not emotionally, strategically. She understands that one limited tournament role could shape how she's viewed heading into 2026 and even 2028 in Los Angeles. International basketball isn't just about this week. It's about resume building. So when she reportedly questioned the offensive structure during early camp discussions, that wasn't rebellion. That was future protection. Because if she's slotted into an off-ball spacer role, if the pace slows, if pick-and-roll frequency drops, if veteran guards initiate most sets, then the narrative becomes dangerous. If she struggles statistically, critics won't blame system fit. They'll say she couldn't adapt. And that label sticks. That's the trap. That's the silent risk. Which brings us to the part nobody talks about publicly, but every elite athlete thinks about privately. Control. USA Basketball has a system that's delivered gold medals for decades. Clark represents something unpredictable. She represents acceleration. She represents influence that extends beyond the locker room. She brings attention that can shift sponsorship priorities, media coverage balance, and internal power structures. When one player suddenly becomes the gravitational center of a sport, institutions feel it, even if they don't admit it. So the question becomes uncomfortable. Is the system protecting chemistry or protecting control? Because if Clark is fully unleashed and becomes undeniably the face of Team USA basketball heading into 2028 on home soil, that changes everything. It reshapes endorsement leverage. It shifts public expectations. It forces the institution to revolve around a new axis. And change like that doesn't happen smoothly. It never has in sports history. So when reports started circulating that Clark asked direct questions in a team meeting about spacing, tempo, and pick-and-roll usage, it didn't sound dramatic. It sounded calculated, measured, professional. But when a young superstar challenges structure in front of veterans and staff, the room tightens, energy shifts, because even respectful questions can feel like pressure when hierarchy is involved. And that's exactly where the story turns. Because once that meeting happened, nothing inside that gym felt routine anymore. And what happened next is where this stops being about philosophy and starts becoming personal. It didn't happen during a game. It didn't happen in front of cameras. It happened in a closed room, early in training camp, before the team even boarded the flight to Puerto Rico, before fans were watching warm-ups, before the tournament pressure officially began. Just a film session, whiteboard, rotations, offensive sets, routine, until it wasn't. According to multiple whispers circulating around the program, Caitlin Clark raised her hand during a system-install discussion. Not emotionally, not dramatically, calm, direct. She asked why the offensive structure limited off-ball movement for guards. She asked why the pace emphasis leaned slower. She asked why pick-and-roll frequency looked reduced compared to what she ran best. Those aren't wild questions. They're basketball questions. But context changes everything. Because this wasn't a freshman in college asking about play design. This was the most talked-about player in women's basketball questioning how the national team would use her. That hits differently. Carol Lawson responded. What was said exactly? Nobody outside that room knows word for word. But what insiders describe isn't screaming or chaos. It was friction, tone tightening, a back and forth that lasted longer than it should have. The room got quiet. And here's why that matters. Clark has a reputation for being coachable. Iowa coaches praised it constantly. Teammates backed it up. She adjusts quickly. She studies film obsessively. She executes instructions. For her to challenge structure in a group setting means something had been building internally for a while. This wasn't a snap reaction. This was accumulated pressure finding voice. Now imagine the dynamics in that room. Veteran guards sitting nearby. Assistants observing. USA basketball officials present. And a second-year pro essentially saying, "Is this the best way to maximize what we have?" Even if phrased respectfully, it creates tension. Because challenging the system means challenging the architect. And institutions don't love that. After the meeting ended, players reportedly filtered out quietly. Conversations happened in smaller clusters. Energy felt different. Then came the moment that changed the narrative. Later that day, someone close to the situation allegedly repeated 2 words Clark said in private. "I'm done." Those words spread faster than anyone inside that building expected. Now here's the critical part. Clark did not officially withdraw. She did not release a statement. She showed up the next morning. But something had shifted. Sources described her demeanor as quieter, more reserved, less animated during drills. Not disengaged, just different. And in elite environments, subtle shifts feel loud. Because chemistry is fragile. One star feeling unheard can ripple through a locker room instantly. By the end of that practice session, closed-door conversations were happening. USA basketball leadership stepped in. Assistant coaches were involved. Stephanie White reportedly had individual dialogue with Clark. But no public statement came. No clarification. No denial. Just silence. And in the modern sports world, silence is gasoline. Within hours, short clips from training camp began circulating online. Clark standing slightly apart during water breaks. Clark leaving the gym without chatting. Clark's expression during drills analyzed frame by frame. Nothing explosive on the surface. But when you attach rumor to visuals, perception becomes reality. The internet doesn't wait for confirmation. It builds its own conclusions. Fans connected dots quickly. Left off Olympics. Historic rookie season. Muted roster acknowledgement. Same coaching presence. Questioning system. Private frustration. And now this. To many, it didn't look isolated. It looked like the breaking point of a year-long buildup. And here's what makes this situation more volatile than most. Caitlin Clark isn't just a player. She's a movement. She represents new viewers, new revenue, new attention, new cultural weight for women's basketball. So when she appears unsettled inside Team USA, even subtly, it feels bigger than one disagreement. It feels symbolic, almost like a test of whether the system can adapt to the era she represents. Now zoom out. Training camp friction happens all the time in elite sports. Stars argue with coaches. Systems get tweaked. Nothing new. But rarely does it happen under this kind of spotlight. Because this tournament isn't just about qualifying. It's the first audition for the 2026 World Cup, and an early positioning battle for the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. Home soil. Global stage. Historic opportunity. Clark knows that. Which means her questions weren't just about this week's playbook. They were about trajectory. If she's limited here, that perception can follow her for years in international play. And that's why this moment carries weight beyond the room. Now here's where things become strategic. If Clark pushes too hard, she risks being labeled difficult. If she stays silent and accepts reduced role, she risks being labeled overrated if numbers dip. It's a narrow lane, and navigating that lane requires trust from leadership. Trust she may not fully feel right now. That's the tension. Not anger. Not drama. Uncertainty. Uncertainty about whether the system sees her as the centerpiece, or as a piece to manage. And that uncertainty is what makes those 2 words echo so loudly. I'm done. Were they emotional? Temporary? Misinterpreted? Maybe. But they revealed something real. Pressure. Pressure from expectations. Pressure from hierarchy. Pressure from knowing every move she makes will be magnified nationally. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Once tension surfaces publicly, even through rumor, it doesn't disappear easily. It lingers. Every missed shot will be analyzed. Every substitution questioned. Every rotation debated. The margin for error shrinks. And that leads us into the bigger game being played here. Because this isn't just about Clark and Lawson. It's about power, legacy, and who defines the next era of USA basketball. And that's where things get even more complicated. If this were just about one heated meeting, it would have faded by now. Training camp tension happens. Players challenge systems. Coaches push back. That's elite competition. But this situation feels different because of timing. And timing is everything. The San Juan qualifying tournament isn't just another international event. It's the first major checkpoint toward the 2026 FIBA World Cup in Berlin. And even bigger than that, the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. Home soil. Primetime American coverage. The biggest stage women's basketball has ever had domestically. Every minute played in 2025 quietly impacts who owns 2028. That's the part fans don't immediately see. International basketball runs on momentum and trust. Coaches remember who executed, who fit, who didn't disrupt hierarchy. And here's where things get uncomfortable. USA basketball historically rewards longevity. Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, veterans with gold medals. Years inside the system. Relationships built over multiple tournaments. Institutional trust. They've earned that. Nobody disputes it. But Caitlin Clark's impact isn't historical. It's disruptive. Her rookie season didn't just check boxes. It shifted public gravity. Her scoring and assist numbers weren't strong for a young player. They were elite across eras. Her assist average alone would have ranked among top guards in nearly any recent WNBA season. Statistically, performance argues she should command major minutes. Institutionally, hierarchy argues she should integrate slowly. That's the collision. Because if you start Clark over decorated veterans, it signals transition. It signals power shifting toward the future. If you limit her minutes, it signals stability. It signals control. USA basketball is standing between those two messages right now. And institutions don't like appearing unstable, especially when global tournaments are involved. Now factor in another reality. The 2024 Paris Olympics posted record television numbers for women's basketball. And Caitlin Clark wasn't even on the roster. That's important, because it proved the sport could generate massive viewership without her. But what it also did was intensify the debate. If ratings are already rising, what happens when she's fully integrated? Does she become the clear face of Team USA? Does the media narrative shift from team dominance to Clark era? That's not just marketing. That's power. And power transitions rarely happen quietly. Here's a number that should make leadership nervous. WNBA games featuring Clark during her rookie season consistently outperformed national averages. Road attendance spiked. Ticket resale prices surged in cities she visited. Merchandise moved at historic pace. New demographics tuned in. Younger audiences. Casual sports fans. Even people who previously never watched a women's basketball broadcast. That type of economic shift changes negotiation leverage. It changes endorsement leverage. It changes future Olympic marketing strategy. Now imagine if she dominates internationally. If she becomes the face of the 2026 World Cup. If Los Angeles 2028 becomes the Clark Olympics. USA basketball would have to recalibrate everything around her. Media days. Brand partnerships. Narrative framing. That's a lot of power concentrated quickly. So here's the real question. Is the system hesitating because it doubts her ability? Or because it's cautious about how quickly she could redefine it? Because if you hand a generational talent the keys too fast, you risk alienating veterans who built the dynasty. But if you don't hand her the keys when performance demands it, you risk alienating the new audience fueling growth. That's the tightrope, and it's razor thin. Now look at the guard rotation math. Gray and Plum are proven. Clark is explosive. Only so many minutes exist. If Clark starts, someone shifts. If she doesn't, the public questions why. And public perception matters more now than ever. Because this isn't 2008. Social media drives narrative instantly. If Clark's minutes dip in a close game, it trends. If she's used off-ball for long stretches, it trends. If she looks frustrated on the bench, it trends. USA basketball knows that. Which means every substitution is political whether they admit it or not. And that pressure doesn't just affect Clark. It affects Lawson. It affects White. It affects veterans who don't want their legacies framed as obstacles to progress. That's why this situation feels heavier than a simple clash. It's generational overlap happening in real time. The old guard still elite, the new star undeniable, and the system stuck in between. Now here's where it gets even more layered. If Clark underperforms statistically in this qualifying tournament, critics will say international play exposed her. They won't mention role fit. They won't mention usage. They won't mention tempo. They'll say she couldn't adjust. Narratives simplify complexity. And once that storyline forms, it lingers. But if she thrives despite tension, if she dominates inside structure, then the hierarchy conversation explodes even louder. Either outcome shifts power. That's why this moment matters so much. Because it's not about whether she plays well for 1 week. It's about who defines the next 4 years of USA basketball. Does the institution protect continuity, or accelerate into a new era? And that leads to a truth nobody inside that room can publicly admit. The stakes aren't emotional. They're strategic. And strategy makes people cautious. Sometimes too cautious. Which brings us to the next layer of this story. Because beyond hierarchy and power, there's something even bigger driving tension. Money, audience, and the ratings factor nobody wants to say out loud. Let's strip away the emotion for a second. Forget the meeting. Forget the tension. Forget the rumors. Follow the numbers. Because the numbers tell a story institutions can't publicly debate. Caitlin Clark's rookie season didn't just break records on the court. It broke patterns off the court. WNBA games featuring her weren't just slightly up in viewership. They surged. National broadcasts featuring the Fever routinely outperformed projections. Road games turned into sellouts. Arena capacity had to be adjusted in multiple cities. Ticket resale markets exploded when she was scheduled to visit. Merchandise moved faster than supply chains expected. That isn't hype. That's economic shift. And economic shifts create pressure inside leadership rooms. Because when one player becomes directly tied to revenue spikes, sponsorship conversations change. Media negotiations change. Future broadcast deals change. You can't ignore that. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. USA basketball operates inside tradition. Gold medals. Team-first branding. Institution over individual. That model has worked for decades. But Caitlin Clark represents something different. She represents player-centered gravity. She draws eyeballs first. Then the logo benefits. That's a reversal of traditional power flow. And organizations built on legacy don't always adjust smoothly when influence flips direction. Because if the audience is tuning in primarily for Clark, then limiting her visibility becomes risky. If she plays limited minutes in a close game, that becomes a headline. If she's used primarily as a spacer while veterans initiate, that becomes a debate segment. If she struggles statistically because of system fit, critics won't blame scheme. They'll blame coaching. And that spotlight isn't comfortable for an institution that prefers collective narratives. Here's something subtle but important. The 2024 Olympics delivered record ratings, even without Clark. That gave USA basketball confidence. But it also created a new variable. Because the sports audience has expanded since then. And much of that expansion traces directly back to her era at Iowa and her rookie campaign. So now the question shifts. Are they building around the past formula? Or adapting to the new market reality? Because here's the tension nobody inside that building can say publicly. If Clark fully dominates internationally, she becomes the uncontested face of Team USA heading into Los Angeles 2028. Not just a star. The star. That changes sponsorship positioning. It changes marketing campaigns. It changes who gets featured in global Olympic promos. It changes the hierarchy. And when hierarchy shifts quickly, people feel it. Veterans feel it. Coaches feel it. Executives feel it. Not because they're threatened, but because stability gets shaken. Now zoom in on something subtle. During Clark's rookie WNBA season, media coverage frequently centered on her. Post-game shows opened with her highlights. Debates formed around her impact. Even when she struggled, the conversation revolved around her development. That kind of narrative dominance is rare. And it shifts attention away from established names. In a league where veterans have built the foundation for decades, that shift doesn't go unnoticed. Now apply that to Team USA. If she becomes the focal point of international coverage, does the program become Clark-led, or does it remain dynasty-led? That's the balancing act. Because USA basketball's identity has always been bigger than one player. But the modern sports economy often revolves around singular stars. LeBron, Steph, Messi, Serena. Global growth often accelerates when institutions embrace individual branding. So the hesitation around Clark's role isn't just about fit. It may be about timing, about how quickly leadership is willing to let one player redefine the public face of the program. And here's the paradox. The new audience didn't show up for conservative half-court sets. They showed up for logo threes, for deep pull-ups, for audacious passes, for visible confidence. They showed up for personality, for electricity, for unpredictability. That's the product they connected with. If that product feels restricted on the international stage, viewers notice. If it feels unleashed, the sport explodes further. USA Basketball stands at that crossroads right now. And the tension at training camp? It reflects that crossroads. Because when Clark reportedly questioned offensive structure, she wasn't just asking about play design. She was indirectly asking whether this stage is built to maximize her impact or contain it. And that's a powerful question. Now here's the final layer of this section. Money doesn't just change narratives. It changes leverage. If Clark continues driving ratings at this pace, her influence in future roster conversations grows. Her voice carries weight. Her presence becomes essential. Institutions know that, which means this qualifying tournament isn't just about wins and losses. It's about positioning. If she shines, her leverage increases. If she struggles, critics gain ammunition. And that dynamic makes every minute on the floor strategic. That's why the tension matters. Because this isn't a random disagreement. It's a moment where economic gravity, generational shift, and institutional control intersect. And when those forces collide, things rarely stay quiet for long. Which leads to the biggest question of all. What happens if she actually walks away? Not emotionally. Strategically. Because that scenario would send shockwaves far beyond one tournament. And that's where this story escalates again. Let's ask the question most people are afraid to say out loud. What if she actually leaves? Not temporarily. Not emotionally. Strategically. What if Caitlin Clark decides that forcing herself into a system that doesn't fully trust her isn't worth it? Because here's the reality. Walking away from Team USA, even briefly, wouldn't just be a basketball decision. It would be a statement. And statements at this level ripple globally. USA Basketball has been the gold standard in women's international play for decades. Wearing that jersey isn't just an opportunity, it's legacy territory. Olympics, World Cups, history. So if a generational American star steps away during the build toward 2026 and 2028, that changes the energy around the program instantly. The headlines wouldn't read, minor disagreement. They'd read fracture. And fractures at the top of a dynasty make people uncomfortable. But here's the twist nobody's fully processed yet. It might not hurt her the way people assume. Because Caitlin Clark's brand doesn't rely solely on international validation. She's already proven she can drive ratings domestically. She's already proven she can carry national attention. She's already proven she can elevate franchises financially. If she walked away and said nothing publicly, just stepped back, the narrative might not frame her as quitting. It might frame her as standing her ground. And that's powerful. Because modern athletes aren't judged only by obedience to institutions anymore. They're judged by autonomy. LeBron redefined player leverage in the NBA. Stars in multiple sports now shape their own trajectories. If Clark signaled that her development matters more than hierarchy, that resonates with younger fans, especially the new audience she brought into the sport. But here's the danger. Legacy math is different in international basketball. Olympic gold medals matter. World Cup performances matter. Absence leaves questions. And critics would seize it. They'd say she couldn't handle adversity. They'd say she avoided competition. They'd say she folded under pressure. Even if the truth were more complex. Narratives rarely capture nuance. So walking away is risky. But staying without trust is risky too. Because if she plays limited minutes, if she's slotted into secondary roles, if she struggles statistically in a system that doesn't fit, that narrative sticks just as strongly. This is the narrowest balancing act of her young career. Now let's zoom even further out. What would it signal to other rising stars? Paige Buchers, Angel Reese, the next wave coming behind them. If Clark challenges structure and the system adapts, it opens the door for player influence in international settings. If Clark challenges structure and the system pushes back, it reinforces institutional dominance. That ripple matters long-term, because we're watching generational turnover happen in real time. The veterans still elite, the newcomers culturally dominant, and the question becomes, who bends? The player or the system? Now imagine the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. Home crowd, primetime American coverage, the most watched women's basketball event in history. If Clark isn't at the center of that roster, the conversation would be deafening. Not just among fans, among sponsors, among media executives, among advertisers who understand what she brings. So if she walks now, she isn't closing the door forever. She's increasing the leverage for when that door reopens. But here's the part that makes this so tense. Caitlin Clark isn't built to walk away easily. Everything about her career suggests competitiveness, not retreat. She responded to Olympic exclusion with a historic season. She responds to criticism with performance. So the idea of her actually leaving feels almost out of character. Which means those two words, "I'm done," may not signal surrender. They may signal frustration, a breaking point moment, a release of pressure inside a confined environment. Because elite competitors don't hate losing. They hate feeling limited. And that's the emotional core of this situation. If she believes her game is being restricted instead of expanded, that eats at competitors. It builds quietly. It surfaces in subtle ways. Body language, tone, energy shifts. But here's what makes this moment bigger than her. If she stays and thrives, she becomes undeniable internationally. If she stays and struggles, critics attack. If she walks and returns later stronger, she looks calculated. If she walks and never returns, it reshapes Team USA's public image permanently. Every option carries weight. And that's why this isn't just about training camp drama. It's about long-term power alignment. USA Basketball isn't just managing rotations. They're managing perception. Because the new era of women's basketball isn't passive. It's loud. It's analytical. It's analytical. It's online 24/7. And it doesn't accept quiet hierarchy without questioning it. So whether Clark plays through this tension or not, the institution is being evaluated. By fans, by media, by future players. And that evaluation doesn't disappear after one tournament. It shapes reputation, which leads to the final and biggest shift of all. Because this isn't just about Caitlin Clark. It's about an era changing faster than the people running it expected. And that's where this story reaches its real turning point. Step back for a second. Remove the names. Remove the meeting. Remove the rumors. What's really happening here? Women's basketball isn't the same sport it was 3 years ago. The audience is different. The spotlight is brighter. The money is bigger. And the players entering the league now carry cultural gravity before they even step onto a pro court. Caitlin Clark didn't just arrive. Angel Reese didn't just arrive. Paige Buchers didn't just arrive. They brought millions of new eyes with them. They turned draft night into a national event. They turned regular season matchups into viral moments. They turned rivalries into revenue. That kind of shift doesn't wait politely for tradition to adjust. It forces adjustment. And USA Basketball is standing in the middle of that adjustment right now. For decades, the formula was simple. Veterans lead. Young players integrate slowly. Hierarchy stays intact. Gold medals validate everything. But the new era doesn't move slowly. It accelerates. Social media amplifies everything instantly. Narratives form in hours, not seasons. And when fans feel like a generational talent is being restrained instead of empowered, they don't stay quiet. They debate. They analyze rotations. They track minutes. They question decisions. That pressure didn't exist at this scale before. Clark isn't just being evaluated as a player. She's being evaluated as a symbol of where the sport is headed. And here's the part leadership can't ignore. The new audience didn't show up for stability. They showed up for electricity, for audacity, for players who shoot from distances that feel unfair, for visible confidence, for personality, for edge. If the system embraces that energy, the sport grows exponentially. If the system tries to soften it, contain it, slow it down, the tension grows louder. This isn't about disrespecting veterans. This isn't about dismantling hierarchy. It's about timing, because generational overlap only lasts so long. Eventually, the torch passes. The only question is whether it's handed willingly or taken through performance pressure. USA Basketball now faces a crossroads. Do they lean into Clark as a centerpiece of the next international era? Or do they integrate her cautiously, preserving established power structures as long as possible? Neither choice is easy. Both carry risk. But doing nothing? That's the most dangerous option. Because momentum doesn't pause. It keeps moving. And if institutions don't move with it, they get dragged by it. That's what this moment represents. Not rebellion. Not chaos. Transition. And transitions are uncomfortable. Especially when they happen in front of millions. So here's the full picture. 2 words sparked debate. A meeting created tension. A system was questioned. But underneath it all, this is about evolution. Caitlin Clark doesn't need protection. She's proven she can handle pressure. She's proven she can respond to criticism with performance. She's proven she can carry expectation heavier than most veterans ever faced. The real question isn't whether she can handle the moment. It's whether the moment is ready for her. Because the tournament starting in Puerto Rico isn't just about qualifying. It's about signaling. Who gets the ball late? Who sets the pace? Who defines the identity of this roster? Every decision from here forward sends a message. Not just to Clark, to the entire generation rising behind her. And whether she stays quiet and dominates, or whether this tension explodes further, one thing is certain. Women's basketball will not shrink back into the shadows. That era is over. The attention is here. The money is here. The audience is locked in. Now the leadership has to decide if they want to ride that wave, or resist it. Because resisting it won't stop it. It will only make the shift louder. The next few games will tell us everything. Watch the minutes. Watch the rotations. Watch the body language. Because the box score won't capture the full story. But the patterns will. And if you think this is the end of this situation, it's not. It's just the beginning. Drop your honest opinion in the comments right now. Should Clark stay and fight through the system? Or is it time for USA Basketball to fully hand her the keys? And if you want real breakdowns that go beyond surface headlines, if you want the full picture every time this story moves, make sure you hit subscribe right now. Because the next update could change everything. And we'll be here the second it does.